Three, two, one. There we go. All right. Shalom, shalom, family. Let's get right to the Lord prayer because we were just live for like not even 5 minutes, but we had a nice little conversation. So real fast, let's say the Lord's prayer, and then let's get to this interesting, deep study. We have a brother with us that's digging more deep than I'm digging in history. So I know a little bit about genetics and prophecy, but this brother right here, he knows a lot about history. So we're going to give him the floor and let him have a conversation. But first, we're going to say the Lord's prayer. So bow with me as we say the Lord's prayer. Our Father in heaven, honored be thy name. May thy kingdom come. May thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us on a righteous path, and guard us from the evil one. In your name we pray. Amen. So shalom, shalom, family. I thank the brothers that was sitting with us in the background listening. The brother is about to get really deep into some scripture, and it's going to lead to some history. So I just seen a little bit. He got some really deep historical facts that we're going to look at. So I'm going to give him the floor. But this is brother Will, and his information, his videos, and his channel is in the description. So this will be brother Will of Yah.
All right, so like the brother said, my name is Will, son of Yah, and basically today we're going to be discussing, the color of the Israelites and get into a little history, a little genetics, and all that. So, of course, we got to start in the scripture to prove everything through the scripture. Then we'll get into everything else because we have to get out of that European-centric mindset that we have on the Israelites being a European people, and we got to see what the scripture says for itself. So can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, so we're going to start off in Genesis chapter 42. We're going to start all the way off in Genesis chapter 42. Just go over some quick scriptures to verify what's going on with the skin complexion of the children of Israel. And remember, the children of Israel are Semitic peoples. All right, they are Semitic people. So, verse 1. Now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his son, when do ye look one upon another? And he said, behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. All right, so remember the timeline, what's going on here. Previous to this, Joseph was sold into slavery or into bondage into Egypt by his own brothers. All right, but during this time, now he's risen up and he's in authority. Verse 4. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brother, for he said, least peradventure mischief befall him. And the sons of Israel came to buy corn amongst those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. And Joseph was the governor over the land. And it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came down and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but he made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly unto them, and he said unto them, whence come ye? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew him not. All right, so why is it that they wasn't able to know their brother? Why is it that they did not remember Joseph? According to, history that we learned in school, according to Europeans, he's white. The Israelites were white. But according to historical first-hand accounts and according to the Egyptians themselves, they were a melanated, dark-skinned people.
That's right.
So that would mean Joseph himself was a melanated, dark-skinned person as well. If you have common knowledge on what's going on throughout this whole story previously, the king of Egypt took off his gold, took off his rings, and you know what I'm saying? Drip Joseph out with, what the Egyptians wear. So he even had on Egyptian jewelry and garments and everything. So with him being black just like them and wearing the same outfit and him, making his voice different, you can see why they didn't remember him or even know that was him.
That's right.
So this is just one clear example that's not really out there, but it's right there in our face.
That's right.
We can jump over to Genesis 50 real quick, verse 1. Genesis 50 real quick, verse 1. And Joseph fell upon his father's face and wept upon it and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. And the physicians embalmed Israel. And 40 days were fulfilled for him. For so are fulfilled those days of which are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned for him 60 days. And when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spake unto the house of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found grace in your eyes, speak, I pray you, in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Lo, I die in my grave which I have digged for me in the land of Canaan. There shalt thou bury me. Now therefore let me go up, I pray thee, and bury my father, and I will come again. And Pharaoh said, Go up and bury thy father according as he made thee swear. And Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went up all servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and the elders of the land of Egypt, and all the house of Joseph, and his brethren, and his father's house, and their little ones, and their flock, and their herds. They left in the land of Goshen. So we see that you had Israelites coming here, right? Joseph, his brethren, his father's house, their little ones, and you had Egyptians, the servants of Pharaoh, the elders' house. All right. So verse 9, and they went up with him, both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. And they came to they came to the thresh floor of Atad, which is beyond Jordan. And there they mourned with a great and very sore lamentation. And he made a mourning for his father 7 days. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning in the floor of Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians. But wait, I thought Joseph and his brethren and his father's house were coming to bury him. You know what I'm saying? Not Egyptians.
Yeah.
Aren't Joseph and his brethren Israelites? So once again, Canaanites are mistaking Israelites as Egyptians. But remember, based off verses 7, you had Egyptians with them as well. So even with this, if the Israelites looked any different, there should have been a distinction made. This is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians and the Israelites. Yet they just bunched all of them into the Egyptian group. So once again, this is a clear example. Going over a couple more verses. Jumping back to Genesis 41, verses 50 through 52. Oh, actually, we're going to skip this, y'all. We're going to skip this. This just going into basically the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh being a Egyptian. That's just to bring out the fact that Ephraim and Manasseh couldn't have been a light-skinned, pale-skinned tribe or a Native American Mexican tribe, just based off this genealogy right here, with us knowing that Joseph was black, and we know that Asenath, right, an Egyptian is black.
That's right. 2
Northern Kingdom tribes are going to be black based off that genealogy right there.
And the reason why we talking about this is because we a different generation. You know, we're a different generation. We're not like the generation before. We got to start accepting this truth, because that's what we're actually studying. We're looking at genetics, but now we're going to start getting into history. But what this brother is doing is giving us that the scriptures itself actually shows us how can we not consider that Israel was actually dark skinned, seeing that many people relate them to people that were of darker skin tone. So this is what he's actually doing here. He's setting the tone, and we're going to start getting deeper and deeper into this information.
And like he said, like, there's no way we should be saying that these peoples, Ephraim and Manasseh, is any other, race. If Shem and his children were black, Joseph was black, and of course, Asenath was black because she's a daughter of an Egyptian. So going on to Exodus 2, verses 15 through 22 real quick. Verses 15, it says, Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to Ruel their father, he said, how is it that ye are come so soon today? And they said, an Egyptian. And
There
they
it is.
said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hands of the shepherds. Is Moses an Egyptian, or is he an Israelite from the tribe of Levi?
There it is. That's really interesting too, because we know Moses, he's not technically the term what people call mixed, and yet he's described as being an Egyptian. And we know that it tells us in scripture that Egypt is the land of Ham. So that's really
Right?
interesting for someone to mistake that he's from the land of Ham just by looking at him.
Exactly. So that should tell you something right there. That they had to look alike. They had to have, similar skin complexions, hair textures, everything. And we can take it all the way to the book of Acts, Acts 21, 37. Acts 21, verses 37. And as Paul was to be led in the council, he said unto the chief captain, may I speak unto thee? Who said, canst thou speak Greek? All right. Who said, canst thou speak Greek? Art not thou that Egyptian, which before these days madest an uproar and leadest out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers? All right. So think of this situation. If it was today and you were in another country and you were speaking, say you was in France and you spoke in that language, the man turn around and look at you and say, aren't you a Negro and you could speak French? This is the same situation. He questioned Paul and said, aren't you an Egyptian and you can speak Greek? But why is he calling Paul an Egyptian? Isn't Paul an Israelite? So we can see from Genesis, basically from the Old Testament to the New Testament, through scripture, Israelites being mistaken as Egyptians. And this is not even all the verses that's throughout the Bible.
These are great examples. I want to talk about this one real fast. What's interesting about this, when you dig deeper, there's actually a part in the book of Judges, the last verse of Judges, where Ephraim and Manasseh actually, we see an example that they merged with Benjamin. That was a time that Benjamin, they call him the son of Bali. And then pretty much, long story short, they end up annihilating Benjamin up to 600 men. And they complain because they can't give them families to marry. So they give them all the women from Ephraim and Manasseh. And long story short, all of Benjamin is actually going to have women from Ephraim and Manasseh. And we even see that if Paul looks dark skinned, then we also have to take in the connection that with Ephraim and Manasseh that we've seen from the previous verses, that Joseph actually has sons from Hamites. And that's actually mixed with Benjamin. So we have to consider ourselves, why don't we see some Israelites with this tone that is actually described throughout the scriptures? And like you said, this is only a few scriptures.
Yeah, this is only a few scriptures. This is not, what I'm saying, getting into Job. It's not getting into the Shulamite woman who's from the tribe of Issachar who told you she's black but comely. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So it's a lot. But yeah, this is all the scriptures that I was gonna show. So if you want to take over now, or
yeah, so what we're gonna do is kind of do like a back and forth. I want to show something real fast.
okay.
So I'm gonna show you something that Will actually has. He has a very interesting video, and we did a video to share my screen real fast. Screen share. One second, just turned it on. All right. So I'm going to show you this because this is really interesting what the brother had. So we was doing some informational notes on the Assyrian conquest. And what was interesting that we realized that a lot of the finds, right, when we look at the wall art, it's really interesting what people see when they see this wall art. And you can see a very interesting replica, but I want to show you it off of what someone else says when they look at it themselves. That's pretty much spreading information, doing tours on it. And I want to show you. And remember, this is the Assyrian conquest, and this is a video of the pretty much a guide at the British Museum, and he basically describes what he sees while describing it to a bunch of people that's walking with him. And I think it's really interesting what he says, what he sees here. And that's why I think it's interesting to look onto the information of these things. But let me show you this. I'm gonna mute real fast so it doesn't echo.
Yeah, you've got the soldiers are laying out two men, and if you look carefully at their legs, you see lines on their legs. Those are exposed muscles and tendons. Because, like we said, the Assyrians wouldn't just kill you; they'd torture you first. So they ripped off the flesh of these men to help them die in a more painful way, and also in order to intimidate their enemies. They were brutal. So let's continue down the line. We've got more slaves that are leaving the city. Now, somebody tell me the difference between this guy and this guy. Whose side do you think this guy's on? The Assyrians. Yeah, the conquerors, the Assyrians. And whose side do you think this guy's on? The slave, yeah, the people from Israel or Lachish. You can tell also by their distinctive hairstyle depicted in archaeology. All right? People from Israel or Lachish. You can tell also by their distinctive hairstyle depicted in archaeology.
So I think it's interesting when we see individuals that look at these finds and say, you know, they look like they're Blackish. And when we look at the descriptions, historical descriptions of Israel, we find some very interesting information. Speaking of which, I have something on here I want to go over, but I'm gonna leave that until I go after this one. I want to show you something that Will actually went over that I think is a very, very, very interesting piece of information that we should all take note of. Uh, Israel constantly throughout history was actually described as being someone of darker pigmentation.
All
Now
right.
I'm gonna show something that I think is very interesting concerning that 57, 55. I'm gonna go to something on here, and I think this is a very deep video that was done 57, 55. I'm gonna go. This was interesting too, but this was not the one I'm looking for. I'm looking for something over around. Oh, I gotta get a charger real fast. But let me go to that spot. I'm gonna show you something on a quote. In fact, that's not on this note. It's on this note right here. Because I want to talk about the reason why I want to talk about this because I want to talk about the DNA, where it's found at, uh, specifically, and the time frame where it's found, and these certain things right here, 3725. So first, I'm gonna play this video that Will had went over, and I highly recommend his channel to look at his history because his history is very legit. His history that he has is stuff that we go over. Is stuff about that you can see right here, the Assyrian captivity, and it talks about how they look and everything, and you just seeing that person who was standing there and seeing the same thing, seeing that these people they have a very distinct look to them, and that we have to consider how they looked at that time when we look at them and look at their hair and look at ideas on what they look very closely like. And now I'm going to show you. He got this very interesting quote. We're going to look at this quote that he reads here. But first, I'm going to show you. If you look at these images, now obviously these are made from stone, right? They're writing on them. But if you take that and really understand what you're seeing there, feature wise, it's not hard to see what you're actually seeing there. It's really not hard to tell what you're seeing there. But let's look at some of these historical quotes that's actually said here. I think it's really interesting on these quotes. I'm gonna play this and I'm gonna see if it echoes because I got headphones in, so I'm gonna see if it echoes. If it plays.
New research on ancient history. New research on ancient history by C.F. Volner. It reads, here, a singular analogy presents itself. Eusebius in his chronicle, or in his chronicon, says in a year corresponding to 1575 before Jesus Christ, that Ethiopians coming from the river Indus encamped and settled near Egypt. All right, so remember who's coming out of this Indus, Mesopotamia area, encamped near Egypt. The Jews, by their own avowal, being of Chaldean race, a branch of black Arabs. All right, a branch of black Arabs. It follows that they are the real Ethiopians. All right, so furthermore, If you talking, bro, we can't hear you, brother.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you good now. You good now.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, you good.
All right. For some reason, I couldn't hear nothing real fast, but now I can. All right. I hope y'all heard that video. The reason why I wanted to go to this because we already looked at the genetics and the history behind the real Arabs. And what's interesting is they actually mentioned that the Arabs being black, being dark skinned, and even we have a son of Ishmael, and his name literally means swarthy, right? When we think about the different sons, right? They say the tents, right? Darkest of tents, right? We actually have an example here of another quote that actually mentions them being dark. But also notice that now remember, these are being written by people who don't really know the book, don't really know the story, don't know the adventures that Israel went through and all that. So they're describing what they're seeing. So they're seeing these people that look like Ethiopians. Remember, Ethiopians cannot change their skin. We can look at Ethiopians today and their skin is the same tone, right? And what's interesting is when we notice that these individuals marked that these individuals look like Ethiopians that came down to Egypt. And that's really interesting because if we connect that with what's said later on about the time of Messiah, a little bit after him, we actually see them mentioning the same thing that the people look like Ethiopians. So I'm gonna let it play because you get another part that connects this.
This is not just talking about one tribe. This isn't just talking about two tribes. This isn't just talking about three tribes. It's talking about the Israelites. It's talking about all 12 tribes. The Jews, by their own avowal, being of Chaldean race, a branch of black Arabs, it follows that they are real Ethiopians. It follows that they are real black faces. We got to put some respect on our ancestors, man.
I don't know, can you hear me? Remember, can you hear me
Yes,
right
we can
now?
hear you, brother. Yeah, we
All
can
right,
hear you.
that's good. So remember, Ethiopian, right? When we look at the root of it, it actually means black face or burnt face. That's actually what Ethiopian means. So for someone to even be called Ethiopian is to say that they surely have pigmentation on their skin.
Facts, facts, facts.
Yeah.
We got to put some respect on our tribes, man. We can't be giving our heritage to others. Continue to build what is truth and inquiry concerning the antiquity and unity of the human race. All right. Let's see what this has to say.
And make sure when you see these quotes, make sure to see the years on these quotes. This is 1871. These are ancient quotes that he's pulling up. These are some rare finds. When you find quotes like these, definitely bring those out to the brethren because when you see quotes like that, all it does is support something that the world won't accept. But we need to keep on bringing it out. We got to keep on, no matter how big, no matter how small we are, we got to keep bringing these facts out because sooner or later there's going to be a generation where they're going to say, I'm glad that those people, even though they was, not liked, because sometimes when you speak the truth, not everyone's going to like the truth, even when it's controversial, especially when it's controversial. But connecting this, you can see the whole thing come together. So, and this is actually quoting from Herodotus, which is really interesting. So we'll look at that too. But let's see this one.
All right. Let's see what this has to say. 2 or 3 instances of changing the physical characteristics of a people are all that our space will permit us to cite. One is that of the Jews. For 1800 years, says Owens, that race has been dispersed into different latitudes and climates, and they have preserved themselves, all right? They have preserved themselves distinct from intermixture with other races of mankind. So don't tell me Israelites moved to all these foreign places and mixed.
That's right.
Don't tell me that. There are some Jews still lingering in the valley of the Jordan, having been oppressed by successive conquerors from Syria for ages, a low race of people, and described by trustworthy travelers as being black as any of the Ethiopian races, all right? As being black as any of the Ethiopian races. So
Man, let's talk about that.
you cut out again, brother. All right. So while he's getting his audio together, let's just, oh, he can't even share the screen right now. Let's see. But what we have to understand, family, is that Shem himself was, a dark-skinned melanated person. So that will go for his descendants as well. That will go for the Israelites. That will go for the Moabites. That will go for the Ishmaelites. All right. That will go for the Edomites as well. You know what I'm saying? And even when you get into the location our progenitor came from, our grandpa Abraham, the land of the Chaldeans, history has described them as being a Negroid people as well. So it's just self-evident right there in the facts. And we have to continue to, dig into this information and see it as face value. And we can't just go off what people tell us, right? Don't go off what we tell you either. You got to fact check this, make sure we speaking what's truth, speaking what's right.
That's right. That's right. So you see how we're doing is we're also provoking thought. We're actually provoking thought that maybe there is evidence that Israel is dark skinned, and maybe we should consider the evidence that many people are actually witnessing that Israel, not just one tribe, but the whole group of Israel, are genetically related. Now, what I want to do is talk about something real fast. I want to talk about a line that was selected by the world that people say is Israel, but actually has evidence of being people that, because there is actually a study that a lot of people quote, and that study goes like this. They say the Ashkenazi have evidence of being in the land of Israel. Amen. Where? In Sidon. Where is Sidon? Sidon is the land that's actually a place that was named by the Canaanites. It's kind of like America, right? If the Americans take a place, they called it America. Whoever takes a place, they name it after themselves. But if someone comes there, then they're called a American, though they may be from somewhere else, or they may be called African, or they are from somewhere else, right? And the reason why I want to show you this is because first I want you to see a little deep history on a quote, because I'm going to bring out another quote, and there's a reason for this certain part of this quote. So I'm going to show my screen real fast. And I thought this was interesting once I had looked this up genetically. Let me show you something real fast. All right, so there's a really interesting quote that said, I'm going to show you right here. I'm going to go up a little bit. I'm going to go to this thing, but I'm going to go up a little bit to this historical quote here. Actually, it's down here. Okay, so here's the quote. So you probably heard of it. It's from the Histories, right? Book 5. It was about 100, and it could be a little earlier than that, but it's as late as 110 AD or CE. Same thing. Watch what it says here. It says a very interesting statement. Now, this is the statement that when we just seen those other quotes, all those other historical quotes, this is another statement that says that Israel, right? We look down here where it says, many again say that they, meaning Israel, saying that they were a race of Ethiopian origin. Now it's really interesting because that's just connecting that statement that Herodotus is saying that the Jews have Ethiopian origin. Now watch what it says here. I want to show you something, that they confuse the people who came down into Canaan with Israel. And I'm going to show you that. Watch what it says here. Some say that the Jews were fugitives from the island of Crete. Now, who was in Crete? I'm going to show you a video. I'm going to show you who actually came from Crete, and I'm going to show you their skin color. Though they had the line of Japheth, they actually had a skin color that was darker. And I'm going to show you that. Who settled on the nearest coast of Africa. So the nearest coast of Africa, not a coast of Africa, that means not in Africa, but at the coast of it, which we actually see Israel is at the coast of that area. We're going to look at two lands in that area, which is going to be the cities of the Philistines and the cities of Phoenicia. And remember, both of these were named by the Canaanites, but these weren't Canaanites in that city. And we're going to look at that. I'm going to show you this actual study. So remember, some people came down into Crete, and we're going to look and see who it is. I'm going to show you this video right here, and I'm going to show you this part. Okay, I'll let you see this little video I made. So this should be all right because I made it. The person is talking is just it's education. So that's one of the things that is I don't know what is someone's copywriting history now. I don't know what is what. Just understand this is history, quoting history. Sometimes it's better to let someone else explain the history than try to do it in your own words. So I'm gonna let this thing play, but everything on here, I put the animations on there for the sake of understanding, and I'm gonna let it play. Let me think. I'm just processing to think if you can hear this because I don't know. I'm gonna skip a little ahead. Let me see. Matter of fact, I'll let it be. I can make the sound on this thing. I think I could. I just want to make sure. I'm going to let it play, and I'm going to listen to see if the sound plays. I'm going to let it play. So I apologize for the quality of it, but watch what this person says here. We could also go to the separate video itself, but watch what it says here. Is also going to show you a little bit on how that goes. Let me just pause it right here. So can you hear me, brother? Can you hear me? Y'all can hear me?
Oh yeah, you all good, brother. You clear.
All right. So what's interesting about this now, we know for a fact when we think of Mizraim, we know that we're thinking about sons of Ham. But there has been facts that are proven that we know that some Japhanites came and reigned in Egypt, but are far distant in the past. We also know for a fact that the Philistines, their genetics actually has a high J. The Philistines, the Canaanites, they have a high R in the land of the Philistines. They have a high J in this area. And the way we know that, because we can look at genetics, just to show you that real fast. Here's a piece of genetic information. They know that the Philistines actually came from the Zagros Mountain or the Caucasus Mountains. And what they actually find there, the genetics that they actually find there, is actually very important to know. When we look at the land of Sidon and we look at some of the genetics that are there, the main genetic that we see there is actually JP58, which is very odd because JP58 is actually supposedly supposed to be a high priest line, but we actually find it in Zidon, and they actually can trace it all the way to the Zagros and the Caucasus Mountains. And they say that's actually where it originated from the north. It actually originated from the north. It says right here, for example, a people that's native to that land is the Natufian. And what's interesting is the Natufian DNA, they actually say this: haplogroup J was absent in all Natufian and Neolithic Levant male individuals. Now, that's important to understand. That means they're not native to that land. They actually are people that came from the north. And that's what you're going to see in this video, that these people actually came from the north and actually aren't a people that actually was originally there. And this is actually prophecy. This is actually a prophecy that happens here. Let's go over here and take a look. So Crete, the land of Crete, what's interesting about this is that the land of Crete, that's actually going to be Captor at that time. So this is Captor, but today it's called Crete. And who came from there is actually going to be a people that was up over here and it came down here. Now, what's interesting is you may be already thinking, well, they're Japheth, so they must be light skinned. Well, the interesting thing about that is, and this is why genetics is so fun, because genetics actually gives you information that maybe the common person, their first thought may not know. But I want to show you something that they actually found when they pulled up the DNA test on those individuals in Sidon. So this will be a real genetic study. I'll just show you the site just to show you where we're cited from right here. I'll just show you this genetic study. So this is very interesting because I'm going to show you why this is important, because there's a quote about these individuals being darker skinned. So I'm going to just put it down right here. I'll find it on the page right here. So I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to read this quote, but I'm just going to read it right here because this has the highlight. Go down a little bit. It's going to go down right here. So it just talks about this part right here. It just says the ones in Sidon. Now, where is Sidon? Just for geographic information, so we understand what we're looking at. I'll show you Sidon on a map, right? And what's interesting about it is that it's a city, right? Tyre and Sidon. It's a Phoenician city that was never taken by Israel, right? There was no Israelites that were up in Sidon. That's what makes it very interesting when we see these things, this information. Now, if an Israelite ever got in there, it would be like one or two or a few that would get there. You wouldn't have a mass number of them. You wouldn't have a mass number. And that's what we actually find there is a J group that's a mass number up there that we know that they came from the north. Now, let's talk about their skin color at that time, because what we have to understand that everyone's skin color at a time back was actually darker. And that's actually evident in this study. I'm going to read this study about the ones in Sidon. It said, basically talks about Sidon and the Lebanese had comparable skin, right? Hair and eye color, right? In general. Now, watch what it says. Light, intermediate skin, pigmentation, brown eyes, and dark hair. Now, watch what it says right here. What's really interesting. It says Sidon BA probably having darker skin than Lebanese today from variants in, now this is very important to understand what they're actually quoting here, this variant number. Variant SLC 45A2. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write that down. This is actually how they can find pigmentation in ancient peoples. Like, for example, you may have seen Cheddar Man, the findings of Cheddar Man, how they know he's actually a darker skinned European. Very interesting because they actually look at his skin tone. Now, Cheddar Man is very dark, though. This is a fairly dark, but not completely dark. But let's look at this. Let's look at this genetic line. It's very interesting when we actually take a look at how dark it actually is. Let's see if I can find this study real fast because I want you to see this. Very interesting. If I can find this one. Yep. So right here. So basically, this is an idea of it, but this is not exactly what I want. I'll just leave this one here, and I'll come back to this. I'm just gonna copy this, and I'm gonna copy this. But before I go to another one, I just want to basically explain to you what it basically means. It's how you find darker skin, right? It's actually how you find darker skin. Higher levels of it basically allows darker skin. And what they're basically saying there, right here, is that they're saying is basically letting us know from this variant, from this one, this results, right, is resulting in darker pigmentation. And what's interesting is we also can combine that with who are the Phoenicians? What are they known for? The Phoenicians were a people that was also known for dye, purple dye, and they're actually called purple people. The reason why they're called purple people is because they actually used to go in the sea and they used to get these certain seashells and they used to take the stuff from the shell and they used to make purple dye. And what that would do is cause their skin to become a little purple. So you can just imagine someone with purple skin and already with a slightly darker skin tone. Now, we're not saying they're black as Ethiopian, but we're actually saying that they are darker skin that came from the north. And that's important to know because let's look what it says in this quote real fast, right? Some say that the Jews were fugitives from the islands, right? The islands of Crete. And that's where the Philistines came from the islands of Crete. So it's really interesting when you look at these things in the context of what's being said. Because at first glance, you may say Crete, oh, that's close by Greece. They must be whiter skin. They must be lighter skin, right? But actually, when we look at the context, that's why context is so important, because the people that came from that area, as we said before, the genetic information shows that they have J lineage, right? They have the J lineage. They're close to the people of the Lebanese, right? They're close to the Lebanese and they're close to Ashkenazi and other people like that. But these individuals at the time of Sidon, during the time when Israel was going around, they actually would have darker skin. They would have a darker skin tone. And that's what's very interesting, because when you see certain historical quotes like that, you got to take in a little bit of note of these things and how these things are worded, how these things are worded. I was looking for a certain one, but I might have to switch to Google to go to that, just to show you a little bit on that. Let me see. I might have to switch it to Google to show you a little bit on that study. It's really interesting though. Maybe I'll grab one from this. All right, it just goes down, talks a little bit about it. The SLC45A2 gene, also called MATP, provides instructions for making a protein that is located in specialized cells called basically where you get your melanin from. All the melanin and everything, all the changing, right? The skin tone, the color. That's important to understand that they're basically saying by looking at that on the Philistines, they actually have darker skin tone than their predecessors, than the generations afterwards, Is that, and in fact, we can look at certain lines like we can look at the Chadic or the Chadic people. We can look at the Chadic people. We can look at the original people of Egypt that had the R lineage, that was rulers in Egypt with the R lineage that were darker skin tone, but they actually had an R lineage. And we also can look at Cheddar men. And this is not unheard of to imagine that people had darker skin at that time. A lot of people think it's offensive when we say Israel had darker skin. It's just that Israel just didn't mix. And we gotta look at the scriptures. What the scriptures say. It says that Israel was actually basically in a system that the Lord made, that they was always going to be not just to their own male, but to their own male tribe. And that's really interesting when we look at those things. And that's why I wanted you to see this, because it says right there that one, they look like Ethiopians and they came from an area that had darker skin and was working with purple dye. So they would have a darker skin tone. And we actually see that in one place, and we see that right here in another place. And what's also interesting is that many of the Greeks, many of the people up there actually said that this race detested of the gods. They actually said that this race is detested. And why would they say that about this race being detested? Maybe because they look a little different. Maybe because there may have been some things going on in the background, even at that time, that still continues on to these days. And maybe we should consider these pieces of information.
And just to add to that, you know what I'm saying, just so people don't think it's so far-fetched for certain people to have once been, you know, dark-skinned, melanated peoples with the same facial features, we can take a look today at the population in India. You got people in India blacker than us, right? But you still got people in India that's pitch white.
That's right.
You got people in China that's blacker than us, but you still got people in China that's pitch white. So which one was their original color, the black or the white? So
exactly, exactly, and this is where we have to look at truth. Speaking of which, I don't know if you was able to hear this video. It was kind of light, but I'm gonna let it finish so you can see that whole thing. So that's why I showed you that, because right, what we think of, obviously, you know, when I first seen this, I'm not gonna lie to you. When I first seen they said they found the Philistines, I said, I just want to know what happened. I want to know what group they are. I want to know what their genetics is. And I seen a J, right? You can type it down, you can find it. It doesn't make any sense if you was to look for it. For example, just put it down, Canaanite, right, haplogroup, or Y-DNA. And you'll find something like this, J2. And what's interesting about that is that, you find different sources that say J2. And the problem with that is that the Ashkenazis say they're J2. The Ashkenazis say they're J. And that the problem with that is that we can't have so-called Hamite Canaanites having Japhanite lines. And that's why we had to look into it deeper. And the deeper thing is really interesting to know that they know that they actually are from European stock, that they actually came from these upper areas. Now, this group, there's a group that came from this area, and there's a group that came more to where the Zagros Mountains is, a little different in direction on that than the other ones. So it's really interesting, though, how they settled there. You got high R's and high J's that settle in that area. It just talks about those things. Like, for example, here's a quote from a genetic site. It just talks about how they sequenced 5 individuals and everything. And they basically says a major Canaanite city. So Sidon is a major Canaanite city. We know that for a fact. That's a city that wasn't taken by Israel and everything. So that's what made it interesting, a more interesting study, because we knew that this, without a doubt, was going to be Canaanites. right? So a major Canaanite city. And then it tells us this. It says, this Canaanite related ancestry, because when they tested the line and everything, this related Canaanite ancestry derived from mixtures between local Neolithic populations and Eastern migrants, genetically related to, I'm gonna go down a little bit, related to basically Iranians, which is really interesting because the Iranians, they have that high J, but they're actually going to be, a lot of them actually going to be from Media, from Mahdi, which is actually, few people actually take that in. When they think of the Iranians, a lot of times, you know, they'll either relate them to Ishmael, they'll relate them to the Persians, but they don't realize that a lot of them actually are Mahdi from Japheth. So that's what they say. They say they're past the north, upwards in that area. And it goes deeper. The study goes deeper. But I want to show you just a direct answer on this thing right here. And pause it real fast because the reason why I wanted to show you this, because Amos 9 and 7, right? It tells us that he calls the Philistines from Captor, right? He calls them from this area and he brings them downwards. And that's actually a fulfillment. All this is actually a fulfillment that the Philistines did come from the north and settle down, though they had a darker skin tone. All right, so that's all you need to see from that for now. So the reason why I wanted to show you that is because, like I said, these are lineages. We know that these are European lineages, but we find them in the area with the Philistines, which is really interesting. This is why, you know, looking at scripture does give us understanding, but we may not understand exactly what was going on at that time. Like, for example, like we said, the sea people coming down there and settling there, which we have evidence for in the land of Sidon. And then again, looking at their skin color, because we do know they have the R lineage, right? Well, this is a classic lineage in Europe today, but they don't look nothing like their pigmentation. Their pigmentation would be even darker at that time. At that time of the original peoples, these ones would have been way darker at that time, and that's what's interesting.
Just like Native Americans have European haplogroups with dark skin.
Exactly. And that's why these things are important. That's why we want to look at genetics, because we don't want to just judge things just by sight. We need to judge it by not just sight, but we have to judge by history. We have to judge by biblical information. We have to judge sometimes by genetic information. And we have to judge also by sometimes linguistic information, which is the study of language. So sometimes we got to look at these three different aspects. And when we get all those things, the final piece of those four things is making a decision. We have to make a decision on whether we're going to believe the truth or we're just going to walk by the truth. And that's why we're doing this information today, to talk about these things. There's a brother that also had a statement to make on some of these things. For example, the major thing is that we also know that Israel, the 10 tribes, went into Africa. It's a fact. It's a fact in genetics. It's a fact in historical quotes. It's just a fact in period. It's just a fact. But we wanted to talk about that. I wanted to see if a brother was going to come today, because he was talking like he wanted to have that conversation. So I wanted to have that conversation on if Israel did in fact go to Africa. And Brother Will, do you have any information concerning that? You know anything of Israel going into Africa?
Oh yes, I have. I definitely have information going into that. So
do you have any like historical evidence that you can show us on that?
Oh yeah, I definitely can show you some historical evidence. But I would just like to say this real quick while I get it together.
Yep.
Nearly whatever tribe you specifically come from within Western Africa, you come from the Igbo, you come from the Ashanti, you come from the Bantus. They tell you their oral history. They tell you where they come from. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So either you're gonna take that as face value as what they're saying, or you're just gonna believe that your people is telling you a lie. Now I'm about to go ahead and show you some of this information. Is my screen sharing?
Now it is.
Okay, let's see. Let me see what I'm gonna go to first.
And while you're finding that, I just wanted to say, we also did a video on the Assyrian conquest. And if you notice the Assyrian stones, all those findings of the Syrian captivity, it shows Israel and it shows how they looked at that time. And that's Israel, right? That's Israel that was sent into captivity. And what's interesting is we actually have Jewish sources, we have historical sources, we have multiple sources, and we have the evidence of the people themselves that witnessed that they was actually taken to Africa. And it's one of those things that we can't contest. We even see it written by Flavius Josephus that in his time, while he was standing in Rome, he said that the 10 tribes of Israel was beyond the Euphrates, right? While he was standing in Rome, he said that they weren't up in Rome. In fact, he word for word says that there are only two tribes in Asia and Europe. He says that only two tribes in Asia and Europe subject to the Romans. And what's interesting about that statement too is that
you wanna go ahead. I'm gonna show you what they look like. One of those tribes that was still left in the east. Go ahead.
Amen. And what's interesting is when we look at this information, we know that Israel would have went to the Romans. They would have went somewhere where it was more comfortable for them. There's no piece of history that says the 10 tribes, which were actually in a innumerable bunch, was up there, but they were down south in Africa. And this is what Flavius Josephus says, downwards of Euphrates.
Okay, so I'm about to just see if I can find this quick picture of the Jews of Koch in India, right? They claim descent from the tribe of Manasseh that was left behind during a captivity, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going. Well, this is just some of the information on them. If you want to find some information on them, you can go to this book, Encyclopedia of India and of Eastern and South, and of Southern Asia. All right. So here's the source if you want to find some information on those Jews in India. But this is just a picture of how they was described. Malabrese's Jews. All right. Portuguese illustration contained within the 16th century. All right, 16th century. So the 1500s, depicting the Jewish people of the Malabar coast in India. All right, and here you go.
And look at that. Just look at those Jews right there.
Right here, Judeos Malabars.
You know what's interesting about that? I actually did a genetic study on that I didn't do a live yet on, but I want to show you something on that. So obviously, you know, seeing that is one thing because it's visual, and that's obviously great to see. It's definitely a hard-hitting fact right there. But I also want to show you something interesting when we look at the genetics. About India, there actually is genetics. Now, we did a deep study on E1B1A and how we seen that E1B1A is Israel.
Mhm.
E1B1A is actually found in India. This is E1B1A right here. So E1B1A in the blue is actually found in India. So you got to ask yourself, how did E1B1A, that's supposedly an African haplogroup, right? How did that get into India? How did that get into the south of India? Now remember, India, you can go to the story of India. India actually was taken over by the Greeks. That's why India actually has this high R. You see this high R right here? Because the Greeks came downwards there. Actually, Alexander's kingdom actually stretched and went all the way up to that area. And then during the time of the Romans and during the time of the split and everything, when everything was going on, you've seen a lot of mixing in that area that happened. Even China reached over there and connected the Silk Road, right? Connected the Silk Road to China and all the European nations and everything. So we got to ask ourselves, how did the E lineage, how did E1B1A actually get into India? Because those were actually the real Israelites. In fact, that picture that he showed, it not only shows Israel being dark skinned, it not just only shows Israel being dark skinned, it also shows the Arab, the Muslim being dark skinned. It actually shows the Muslim being dark skinned as well. So it's very interesting to see these things and look at the genetics and get the full pictures on these things. And obviously, this is one of those things that I'm also going to go over and talk about the genetics. Maybe y'all willing next Sunday. This Sunday, I was going to do a live on Gog and Magog, but listen to me when I say this. The genetic information on this people called Gog and Magog is actually more complex than it seemed. It actually has it's a mingled people. It has so many Y chromosomes mingled up in it, but we're going to talk about it once I get the connection because there's so many different lines, but definitely getting the connection there on those things. So I'm connected R's, I'm connected I's, I'm connected all types of lineages that we're going to talk about soon. But the reason why I wanted to show you this, because that was amazing information, because that's actually what you see when you look at the genetics. You do see E1B1A, and you do see a darker skinned people that was described as Jews, right? They were described as Jews. And that's really interesting to even see, right? That's really interesting to even see on those things. So I thought it was interesting that you brought that up.
Right. Okay, I got you. And it like you said, the DNA wouldn't be out there for no reason unless people that look like us from the same fathers as us with the same DNA is out there.
Yep, that's right. Exactly.
Why is people in India, right, in the same, right? Why is people in India with the same DNA as people in West Africa? So
isn't that something? And what's interesting is if you look at the history of these individuals, they actually are hated also in India. They're a group that's actually hated in India, that's separated from the population.
And they like you was just saying, they hated by the population, and they are mistreated and enslaved by the Ashkenazis, who they call newcomers.
That's right. You're gonna have J lineages there, you have L lineages there, you got that large R there, right? These are the people that's native to that area, that's mostly native to the area. The Japhanites that's native to the area is H lineage. This H lineage right here, but you can see it's not even the majority there. This place is constantly had different visitors from different areas there. Very interesting history that you can see from these things to see why you have our lineages from European lands there. That's just because that conquest of Alexander, when the Seleucus kingdom actually spread out that way, and then one of the people named Demetrius II ended up reigning in a certain part, but after the kingdom, someone had assassinated him. Then the kingdom split, and that's when you got that lower portion that had ruled a little bit in the land of India. So it's really interesting history, and then obviously interesting to connect the genetics too. Very interesting.
Facts.
That's right. That's right. But did you have any other? Did you
Oh yeah, I
have
got
something
you.
else?
Yes,
because
yes.
I seen you had a few things.
Oh, I got something for you. Nice. I got something for you. I
Yeah,
got
I'll put your screen back on.
because what we have to understand is our people didn't migrate with just one migration, right? You had like the earliest migration happened right after the census was taking place in the book of Numbers, right? You had a branch of people migrate off.
Mm-hmm.
You had Israelites go into Carthage with the Phoenicians, right? From Tyre and Sidon, like you was mentioning earlier.
That's right.
And those in coincidence, the tribes that went to Carthage and founded Carthage was the tribes of Asher and Zebulun. So where are these, Colombians and these Mexicans in Africa today?
That's right.
We all claim our people, but I'm finna go ahead and go into this. We're gonna, since you brought out the Syrian captivity, we're just gonna go to Second Esdras real quick,
That's right.
and we're gonna show you that Osiris was. We're gonna show you what Osiris really means. All right, Second Esdras 13, chapter 40. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prison out of their own land in the time of Osei the king, who Salmanassar the king of Assyria led away captive. He carried them over the waters. All right, he carried them over the waters. And so they came into another land. He carried them over the waters when they was leaving their land, going to Assyria. But they took but they took this counsel amongst themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. All right. So the Most High said that there they might keep their statutes. That's one thing which they never kept in their own land. All right. And they entered into the Euphrates. So we see them going back through the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. And it's a lot of brothers out here that got a lot of like videos of the Euphrates River showing that you can't even ride a boat through that place, that you literally can walk through it on camels. So you can't even, you get what I'm saying? You can't even get on a boat that will fit 10 tribes of men, women, children, animals, food, and water. But for the Most High showed signs for them, and he held still the flood till they were passed over. Another thing, you don't need to hold still a flood if you're on a boat. For throughout that country, there was a great way to go, namely a year and a half. And that same region is called Arsareth. All right. So we're going to take it to this book right here. We're going to make this connection. Matter of fact, we're going to go back to that real quick later, but I'm going to read this first.
All right.
This book is West African Countries and Peoples. West African Countries and Peoples. And we will start right here.
Are you able to tell us also the year of it?
Yes. Let me back out and see. This is 1969. 1969.
Amen.
Let me see. 1969, and we will start on page 169. It says, Northern Egypt then was the most known portion of the globe, and into a vast immigration took place from time to time, even to the most remote period. The 10 tribes of Israel, after they were left to follow the dictates of their own mind. All right, who we talking about? The 10 tribes of Israel. after they were left to follow the dictates of their own mind. And during the commotion and destructive warfare which ensued to escape utter extermination, migrated according to the uses of times in vast numbers into various countries, but principally into Northern Africa. And even when they would migrate into Arabia and those other countries, they would later migrate into Africa, which we can, show and prove as well. As it then presented the safest and easiest routes, once settled, every commotion intestine war had the most powerful effect of inducing these bands to shift their abode still further, and so all lose connection with the other branch of the tribe. As hundreds of years pass on and generation after generation roll away, they lose a great many of their habits and customs. All right, so this is what happened to the 10 tribes. This is the history, but listen. Becoming more amalgamated with the population with which they associate. But when Mohammedanism overspread North Africa, destroying by the fire and the sword all those of another religion, the Israelites' descendants or the inhabitants occupying the central portion of the central portion of Africa, passed forward seeking shelter to the south and west, in part, namely, those from the east central crossing the Benue or Jalaba branch of the Niger. All right. Of the Niger. Where's the Niger? West Africa. Descending gradually southward and became intermingled with the original inhabitants. Protected from incursion. What does it say? Protected from incursion. What the Most High say? They will dwell with no man never dwelt.
Yeah.
On the north by the Benue River and quietly settled between